We're going to get started with a story, really several stories, or versions of reality, or ways people view the world. The first set comes from Joanna Macy, who refers to herself as an eco-philosopher. For decades, she has been helping people wrap their minds around the enormous changes that are going on at this point in human history. She's trained lots of people who offer courses and trainings under the idea of the work that reconnects. Macy says, in the industrialized world today, the most commonly held stories boil down to three. We have found it helpful in workshops to present these three stories as all happening right now. In that sense, they are all true. We can choose the one we want to get behind, the one that seems to hold the widest and most useful perspective. The first story Macy shows us is business as usual. This is the story of the industrial growth society, the story that humanity is on a linear path of greater and greater improvement. More glossy, shiny new stuff. This story encompasses Western civilization, the economy, and the mainstream definition of progress. This story not only accepts growth as good, but does everything it can to continue to prop that up. Macy says, we hear it from politicians, business schools, corporations, and corporate-controlled media. And the central plot is about getting ahead. Economic recessions and extreme weather conditions are just temporary difficulties from which we will surely recover and even profit. When you hear evaluation of the health of the economy based solely on what the Dow Jones is doing at the moment, that's the business as usual perspective. When you hear expectations of salaries growing, real estate values going up, corporate sales increasing, that's all business as usual. When you hear praise of the green revolution in agriculture, that's business as usual. When you hear things like, enough COVID lockdown, we've got to get back to normal, that's the business as usual story talking. In fact, the whole concept of quote unquote normal in U.S. society is currently dictated by the business as usual perspective. A second story is the story of the great unraveling. Macy says this is the story that we tend to hear from environmental scientists, independent journalists, and activists. It draws attention to the disasters that business as usual has caused and continues to create. When you hear the panic, the sky is falling, we're at a tipping point, the great collapse is right around the corner or is happening all around us, environmental panic, even social and political panic, that's the perspective of the great unraveling. The third story Macy describes is that of the great turning. Macy isn't the only one who uses this term. David Corton wrote a book by that title, and the term is central to work by Rob Hopkins and others. In Macy's words, this is the story we hear from those who see the great unraveling and don't want it to have the last word. It involves the emergence of new and creative human responses that enable the transition from the industrial growth society to a life-sustaining society. The central plot is joining together to act for the sake of life on Earth. But Macy's three stories aren't the only perspectives. Let me read an excerpt from a collaboration of Indigenous people from several parts of the world. We'll revisit the full message later in this course. Indigenous cultures often share the view that there is no good, bad, or ideal. It is not our role to judge. Our role is to tend, care, and weave to maintain relationships of balance. We give ourselves to the land. Our breath and hands uplift her gardens, binding our life force together. No one is tainted by our touch, and we have the ability to heal as much as any other life form. Indigenous cultures often see Earth as going through cycles of continuous transition. We currently find ourselves in a cycle of great decomposition. Like any process of composting, there is discomfort and a knowing that death always brings us into rebirth. Within this great cycle, we all have a role to play. Recognizing and healing all of our traumas is healing Earth's traumas because we are one. In this course, we'll come primarily from a perspective of the Great Turning. We'll explore the many ways people are putting in place new and creative responses, facilitating this great transition. The perspective of the Great Turning means we will take a look at the Great Unraveling. However, we won't allow it to have the last word. Our primary focus will be on what people around the world have been doing with our ability to heal. To me, this is a place of great possibilities. It invites a path for creativity. It feels like progress, and some people call it course correction, but perhaps it's simply evolution, evolving out of business as usual, which has been drilled so deeply into our consciousness. Throughout this course, you'll see that means evolution in the physical tools and technologies we use in everyday life, but also evolution in our thinking, in our philosophies, in our perception of the human place within the big picture of life on this planet. To me, the Great Turning inspires hope.